All right, Jerry, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. For background, I think this group is our second meeting, so I won't go through. I see Colin's here. Hello, Colin. And Alyssa. Wow, a lot of people I know from Portland area. This is our second meeting of the TAC, so I think the TAC has already met itself, and we're relatively large groups. We may not go through a full introduction round, unless you think we need to, Gail. But I'm going to turn most of this presentation over to Brendan, who's going to talk through what we're finding so far on the employment and buildable land inventory. With Mackenzie, we'll be working with that as well. And again, as a advisory group, as opposed to a listening group, we're actually hoping to get a lot of participation from you in this. And so if you have any issues, things we're missing, to make sure we do this correctly, we understand your community. We will never understand it as well as you do who live in it. So we really do encourage a lot of interruption in essence. So at that point, I'll turn it over to Brendan, who's going to run us through a brief presentation, then we'll start discussions as well.
Thanks, Jerry. Hi, everyone. I'm Brendan Buckley, also at Johnson Economics, and we also have Sid here from McKinsey, who helped work on our buildable lands inventory. We have some kind of technical findings and product we want to talk about, but we want to keep that brief in the hopes of having more discussion today with this group and using, this is a very good collection of economic development experts from the region. So we want to make sure we use your expertise well and make the best use of this time we have. So I do have a brief presentation. Before we move on, as Jerry said, we did do a round of introductions last time. I guess I would ask, is there anyone here who was not here last time who would like to introduce themselves to the group? I see Lindsay raising her hand. What can you give an introduction, Lindsay?
Thank you. Lindsay Davis with Hampton Lumber, based out of the resource office in Napa. And then we also have the lumber mill out in Warrenton here in Clatsop County.
Great. Were there any other hands? Jay?
Yeah, I'm Jay Blake, the new planning manager for Clatsop County.
Great. Welcome. Kevin?
Yeah, Kevin Brown, region manager for Naveen Natural Capital, but also here with Lewis and Clark Timberlands in Clatsop County.
Great.
We got Colin as well.
Good morning, Colin Cooper, new economic executive director for the Colpac, and Sarah Lou's our point on this, but I just thought I'd listen in today. Thanks.
Thanks.
And hi, I'm Alyssa Gertler. I'm the county's housing manager, just so you know why I'm here.
And then
I'm Monica
Monica.
Steele, the assistant county manager.
And then I'm Sid Hariharan. I'm a land use planner with Mackenzie.
Great. Anyone else? All right. I thought I saw some new names and faces here, so I did want to give people a chance to do that. I am going to try to share my screen here. Can everyone see this? I hope.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Here we are. So our agenda today is to give a little update of where we are. I'm going to talk a little bit about some industry and economic trends that we're putting into the report at this point. It's basically, I want to provide some background and context. We can have some questions and comments about that material, but hopefully it's just to set up the discussion that follows on some goals, policies, challenges, target industries, and want to make sure we understand the feedback from this group about those things before we put our jobs forecast together. And then at the end, we'll talk about a buildable land inventory and go over the methodology used for that. So where we are in this process is we're still in the beginning stages of pulling the main products together for the to put into the economic opportunity analysis report and the strategies that come out of that. So today we have some results from the buildable lands inventory and economic and industrial trends and so on. That's all going to go together into one report called the economic opportunities analysis, and that helps us put the strategies together. So these are the sort of technical parts of this process. What we need to get from you guys is more of the background expertise and advice on what will go into those policies and strategies. So I'm looking at jobs trends in the county. This is what's happened over the last 10 years or so. You'll see growth in Clatsop County was fairly steady, took a setback, obviously, for COVID in 2012, but it's now basically back to its prior high level from before, from 2019. In the last 10 years, the county has added about 2,000 jobs, grown by 12%. So that's 200 jobs annually, and that has kept pace or even outpaced your household growth in that period. So that's a good sign that you're adding jobs at a similar pace to households. In terms of what happened during the COVID years, you're took a very big hit over just a couple months in terms of your employment, lost almost 5,000 jobs in the county. That was a 25% job loss from the previous high. So very quick, immediate impacts, most of the state and nation felt, but it was felt, I think, even more acutely in many tourist-oriented areas when people ceased to travel and things kind of closed up and locked up for a while. But as I said, you've nearly recovered from that. So when we talk about the growth in various industries over the last 10 years or so, that obviously hasn't been even. So what are the components of that growth? Which industries have added jobs and which have taken a hit? And what you can see here is there are quite a few industries that actually have lower employment. This is based on data from the Oregon Employment Department. A number of sectors that actually have lower employment now than they did about 10 years ago. Some of the major maturing clusters, as we call them, in the county, which are the forestry, fishing, natural resources industries, wood product manufacturing, and the food processing that come out of those industries. All those have lost at least a little bit of employment, but they remain very strongly represented in the county. So that's what we call mature clusters. They're still a very important part of your local economic base, but they have perhaps stagnated or steadied in their growth.
Can I add a comment here?
Yep.
Yeah, Kevin Lade, Director of CEDAR. I just want to mention also on the forestry and fishing side, these numbers are traditionally pretty vastly underreported because a lot of these folks are single proprietors in how they report their employment. And just kind of FYI, that's something we've dealt with for many, many years. Okay.
Do you find, Kevin, that those are underreported to the upside or the downside? In
other words, they're not reflected on these numbers if you pull these from Oregon Employment Department data.
Because QCW is covered employment, so if the sole proprietors won't show up.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yes. Yes, important point. So this is the covered employment, and it doesn't include many self-employed people, self-proprietors, and some types of contractors. Thank you. So
I have a quick question too. Sorry to interrupt. When you say jobs, are you talking about FTE or are you just talking about a job posting?
this is all jobs.
So in regards to full-time employment versus part-time employment?
Yeah, this is average employment over the course of the year.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So some of the declining clusters are clusters that maybe were not such a significant share of employment to begin with, but are also in some decline over the past 10 years or so. But you see also those industries that have grown. Some big ones are retail, construction, and then of course accommodation and food services, which is another word, another term for your tourism oriented sectors. So that's going to include your hotel and lodging industry, your dining and recreation, and many of the things that go along with tourism. So that has grown a lot and actually represents a fairly significant share of the job growth over the past decade.
I did also want to mention, I think most people are aware of this, but during COVID, Clatsop County had the second highest unemployment rate in the entire state, second only to Lincoln County. So we've come back a long way.
Yeah, thank you. So this is the share of that current employment as it exists today. As mentioned, this is the covered employment. It doesn't include some of those subgroups. But the breakdown of where that industry is today after those changes we were just talking about, the leisure and hospitality, tourism related sector has grown to be 27% of your overall county employment. So that's a major sector, along with healthcare, social assistance, and retail trade. So those are now your largest sectors by employment. But other sectors obviously remain important, and some of those others are the ones that perhaps pay higher wages as well. So that's only emphasizes their importance. On the right, you see a growth clusters. Those are ones that are sort of already have strong representation among your industries, but have also been growing. Emerging clusters are ones that perhaps in the past have been a smaller share, but we see them have experienced good growth in the last 10 years. So those are what might be emerging is warehouse and distribution. That's a little tricky given your geographic location, but that's also an industry that's growing nationwide with the growth of e-commerce. So it's going to be an increasing presence almost everywhere. Healthcare has grown and will continue to grow, and then real estate property management is also expected, particularly with the growth in tourism. So this is a comparison of countywide share that I just showed you, that's in blue, with what the employment profile looks like in the unincorporated parts of the county, which is part of the focus of this study. So just to give a quick picture of how different those are and how different the types of employment are in the two areas. So when you get into unincorporated areas, manufacturing, and that's basically, that's close to only wood product manufacturing, is over half of the employment. Again, as Kevin pointed out, this is missing a lot of some of the types of temporary seasonal labor, things that don't get included in this measure of covered employment. So you'd expect the forestry jobs shown here to be a greater share than what's shown here. Leisure and hospitality remains to be an important share of employment, even in the unincorporated areas. That's almost 20%. I'm gonna check on the chat real quick, make sure I'm not missing anything. Maybe Jerry, if okay, you are looking at the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll monitor the chat, Brendan.
Gotcha. Thank you. Some quick information on tourism pulled from Travel Oregon. It shows that direct travel spending is back essentially to the pre-COVID levels. Their data only goes through 2022, but I think looking at this trend, it's probably safe to say that in 2023, the direct travel spending probably surpassed the previous high. The tax receipts on the right there took less of a hit overall during COVID and now exceed the previous level. So really that just shows a good strong rebound of travel spending in Clatsop County, which is a positive, of course. So where are the jobs in the county versus where people live? I know there's a lot going on this slide, but on the left side, what you see is a comparison of where the employment is. That's in blue bars, and how much of the population lives in those areas. So in Astoria, for instance, the city is home to roughly 38% of the county's employment and 24% of the county's population. Looking at the unincorporated area, it's got about 7% of the overall employment. So most of the employment obviously is within the UGBs of the incorporated cities, but it has 35% of the population. So that's something that obviously creates a workforce dynamic of where people live versus where they're working and how they need to get to those jobs. On the right-hand side is a look at local jobs and who holds those jobs in each of these areas. So again, on the upper right, looking at the example of Astoria, an estimated 67% of local jobs are held by people who are commuting into the city. About a third are held by people who both live and work in the city. When you pull out to the countywide numbers, you see it's kind of reversed. Almost 2/3 of people both live and work in the county, and a third are coming in from outside of the county. So really, there's a lot of cross commuting happening to get to the local jobs that are available. This is fairly common in any sort of integrated region, but it's something to be aware of.
Brendan, when you say countywide, does that include all the cities, and we're talking the county as a whole, incorporated and unincorporated?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, that's the entire county, including the cities. This is a similar look, but this is about where working residents live. So the in each city. So in the example of Astoria, 64% of working residents work outside the city and 36% within. Countywide, 57% of working county residents are working within the county itself and 43% outside. So it's looking at the residents rather than the last slide, which looked at the jobs themselves. On the right is residents who commute more than 30 minutes to their job based on census estimates. So for the county as a whole, almost 25%, almost a quarter of folks are commuting 30 plus minutes to their work. That has to do, I think, with both the size of the county and how far people have to travel, and then the ways you have the 101 and 30 to being the main organs for people to get where they're going. So and you can see amongst the cities, there's a little variation in how far people are how many workers have longer commutes. And so related to that question about the workforce is home prices. This is something that we've already talked about, and I think is going to keep coming up, is where people are living and where it's affordable to live for workers in different industries, some of which are not necessarily the highest earning industries. So I put together a simple comparison of sort of an index of how much these different things have grown since over the last 10 years, roughly. And what we find is that wage growth that's average annual wages in blue has outpaced inflation over that time, but the growth in home prices has far exceeded the growth in local wages. And that's what's shown in gray there is estimate of the growth in home prices in Clatsop County. So the median home price now is approaching or has surpassed $550,000. It's basically more than doubled over the last 10 years. There's still 25% vacancy. This is something that was discussed in a lot in the housing study of a few years ago, which is there's high vacancy because of the number of vacation rentals and second homes and so on. But also there's the issue of short-term rentals. We found in that housing study that the growth rate of short-term rental activity was outpacing the growth of new housing production. So it was basically taking an incrementally greater share, growing faster. And finally, looking at some census data from about the past 5 years or so, the number of households that have been added to the county has outpaced the amount of housing production. So obviously that is going to exacerbate some of these issues. Do we have any?
Jump in on this housing thing?
Yep.
If the 25% vacancy actually means 25% second homes, could that be written that way? I was also part of pretty much the same representative group back when they did the housing study. And so it's nice that we've been told what that really means, but if the language could reflect that there is a 0% vacancy for workers that need housing.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I see your point. Very important point. The vacancy for people for residents looking for housing is not 25% or even close to 25%. Especially for renters, as you point out.
Well, and to emphasize Sarah Lou's point, we went to a housing summit like a year ago in Seaside or whatever, and exactly to her point, when they're talking about the shortage of housing in Clatsop County, we didn't have any. Of course, the whole crowd was in an uproar. So it's a very, very important distinction.
Okay. Thank you for that reminder. We will be sure to make that distinction. It's obviously a challenge that the Oregon coast and a few other resort type communities in Oregon face is
Right.
dealing with that second home question.
Well, and this was mentioned in the comments, but the increasing prevalence of remote work is also another challenge to affordability, because now suddenly you have the ability of people to be employed in higher wage areas, maybe like the Portland Metro or even Seattle, Tacoma Metro, and reside in an area like the county with wages that don't match county wages. And it puts a lot of price competition on local housing.
Mm-hmm. In preparing for this, I saw that at least according to the census, which has fairly high margin of error, but they seem to think that the vacancy of 5 years ago or so was approaching 30%. Again, not vacancy, but second home vacancy. So if that has come down a little bit, I think that would reflect that some of those second homes are now being occupied as primary homes, and then you would see perhaps retirees relocating to what has been their vacation home and moving to the coast. That is probably a trend you're going to see given age demographics. But then also that might reflect some of those remote workers making that same choice. And so some of that second home and
Brendan, I don't mean to keep popping in here, but you said to go ahead and do that. So tell me if anyway, I may mention the first meeting, but there was a study. It was in the Oregonian a few months ago, showing to the high income wage earners. I don't know if I mentioned this on the first meeting or not, that have relocated out of Multnomah County, and it had like the mapping. And I believe the number was those that made, I think, 250 grand a year or more. Like 125 of them from Multnomah County have relocated to Clatsop County. And I know that working with the city manager of Gearhart, for example, it talks about the water usage going up there. So you mentioned retirees, but also the remote workers, but these higher wage earners. And again, that was something that showed most went to Clark County, as you're well aware. But it was just interesting that Clatsop County got that chunk of those high wage earners. I think because they probably had homes in Cannon Beach and Gearhart and elsewhere in the county.
Thank you. That's great. I'll try to find that article. We can add that context. So again, the main takeaway here is that housing is getting very expensive, and we know most people in the county are not high-income workers coming from elsewhere. They're local residents who work local jobs and need to find housing. So that's a significant challenge that's going to come up again and again, I think, in this study. So with that, that is, again, just to provide some context and background on industry sector before we get into a little bit of more discussion. So were there more questions and comments on any of the sort of data or numbers we were just discussing?
I do know that historically the GP WANA numbers, and again, that can be, I'm sure, confirmed, I think are in the neighborhood of 7,800 or so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I got an email out to Callie over at GP wanted to kind of give me some numbers on how many Clatsop residents are employed there.
Appreciate that, Lindsay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So what we're really hoping is that this some of that context helps feed into what we would like to talk to this group about today. And that is establishing some of the major parts of what is going to come out of this study. And what it boils down to what the county and its partners would like to see, and what challenges they face, and what the county can do given certain limitations, what it can do coming out of this. So that's what we'd like to get some feedback on. First, we'd like to talk about what target industries might be going forward. We do have a lot of background on this, and this is something that we also touched on last time, but I want to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. So from the previous comprehensive plan, which was, this chapter was updated last year, the things that were in there were obviously forestry and wood products, marine resources, seafood processing. So some of the major industries that have been the major industries for a long time were obviously called out in there. Things like education, services, healthcare, and then the growing importance of arts, entertainment, recreation, and then tourism, including things like dining and retail. Those are all things that were mentioned in the comprehensive plan as likely sources of growth and target industries. Other things that came out of our discussion last week were other types of food processing, going beyond the seafood industry to talk about fermentation industry in particular, new types of efficient use of some seafood products or new seafood products, and then other types of specialty and craft food that often goes along with tourism economies. So then we talked about the both promise and perhaps challenges of having the remote workers in the county as a growing portion of the population. They bring some resources and some money and also some opportunities for entrepreneurship. So that is a possible, could possibly be listed as a target. Other things that were mentioned was growth in some of the government sectors, including the Coast Guard and Camp Riley. And then other things that were more question marks, I think, were ways to target things that can bring more off-season activities and attractions to the county. And I think we sort of left, at least to our minds, we're a little undecided about destination resorts and whether that's a popular or sought after target for unincorporated parts of the county or not. So that's the list we have now. I want to open up discussion to what you guys think of this list. What's missing? Is there anything on here that does not make sense for the next 20 years of economic development planning? Things you're surprised to see or would like to see? So please put up your hands and we'll get started. I see Monica, maybe we could start with you.
Sure, I was just curious in regards to the marine resources, and I don't know where this falls, but you know, the work that's being done out at Tongue Point with HIAC and WCT, that's, I don't know, depending on, and Kevin might be able to speak more to it, but something like that I would look at as less seasonal, but it's you know, part of the marine industry.
Well, that's my comment to your point, Monica. The maritime sector, however you want to define it, you know, we have the largest electric mobile lift in the world coming here in July. It will be in place by July out at North Tongue Point. And as enterprise zone manager, WCT Marine will be adding eventually hundreds of jobs. So however we say maritime or that boat repair, ship repair, they have contracts with the Coast Guard, with the cruise line. So what would you say that from a sector? I guess I'd ask the group. Or
If you were asking the group, I would agree with you, Kevin and Monica. I don't think it's particularly seasonal. I think it's going to be growth of living wage jobs. And I think it could be marine or maritime. I'm probably not the expert on the exact particular vocabulary, but you know, I agree with you, Kevin.
Thanks.
Yeah, I agree too. And, you know, it's certainly something that we can build off of.
Okay, great. I think that the potential seasonal nature was something that was called out as a challenge in the comp plan language. So, but it sounds like, you know, that's changing, and we want to emphasize those aspects of the maritime industries that are not seasonal. Am I summarizing that correctly? Does that?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I can imagine is seasonal about it is if it included cruise ships for the port. But other than that, and unless it's in reference to fish closure, but that would really, I feel like that would be a minute detail that wouldn't rise all the way up to calling the whole industry seasonal.
Okay. All right, we will make that change and make sure we reflect that. Let's see, Gail.
Yeah, I guess I have more of a question, Brendan. When you have been looking at the forestry and wood products sector, have you, in your trends analysis and your target industries, have you factored in potential job losses if the habitat conservation plan is implemented?
That is very much on our radar. Our next slide is talking about some of the challenges we've identified, but that's going to come in the next stage when we do the jobs forecasting 20 years forward. And so that's the kind of thing that we're going to need input and thoughts on, how significant that impact might be and how much we want to kind of forecast that those job losses might look like.
Just to add to that, I think it's going to be critical because that's a huge sector. But to Kevin's point earlier, we're going to have to figure out how to capture all the sole proprietors because it's going to have a significant impact on them as well.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and I was gonna kind of just ping on to that, you know, having the baseline correct going into that potential challenge that we're all facing with HCP is going to be important because I would disagree that it's been falling employment over the last 10 years. There's been significant in investment in infrastructure and whatnot at our mills, both at the Georgia Pacific Wanna Mill and our mill and others. And we haven't stopped hiring, and I know others haven't as well. So I think it's important that we make sure we get that baseline correct before we jump forward as well.
Thank you. It's a point well taken. It looks like obviously we need to dig more into the types of employment in that sector that aren't showing up in the covered employment set that we get from the state. So that we'll obviously have to refine that and come back with a more solid baseline, as you say. So I should emphasize that when we talk about target industries for the EOA process, the EOA is allowed to be aspirational. It's allowed to reflect the positive goals and what the county wants to accomplish. So the forecast should be realistic, but it can also be aspirational. And so if it is a county policy and they want to enact, for instance, growing the timber industry instead of shrinking it, then that can be reflected in the goals and policies coming out of this. It sounds like that would be might be a serious challenge, but that's also the kind of thing we can talk about. So I just want to emphasize that the forecast we come up with should reflect what the county wants to do with its economic development goals and not be doesn't have to be a super realistic, pessimistic view of each industry. So
We've got hands raised.
I know we got comments and hands all over the place. So Sarah?
Yeah, thanks. I think that manufacturing is missing from this list. Our fermentation industry is classified under manufacturing. We've also got electro, K&M. If we're onshoring, I think we have opportunities to work clusters in the metro area for different industries. So I'd love to see that included.
Great. Okay. Kevin.
I want to mention also, Jay Blake gave a great comment in the comments about construction. When you look at what's happening here in our county the next 5 to 7 years, I know that, Eric Thorson is a key part of this group, but with the CMH construction project, with the Maritime Museum, a $30 million expansion, again, the CMH project upwards of 225, 250 million, and other projects throughout the county. So construction, how do you weigh that in? You say, well, those are kind of like, those aren't permanent jobs. That involves housing. That's a big issue we're trying to deal with, or we'll be dealing with.
I think the construction trades are you can actually put them in as a target. Quite often it's not seen as a leader, it's a follower because it's induced by other demands. But what we do find is if you have a strong construction contractor system within your county, it allows you to capture a greater share of that employment as opposed to it being coming in for temporary employment for construction. So ongoing support of a local construction sector, an expansion of that is a really valid goal.
And I also think of like Burgers to Construction, right? Locally home-based, kind of our secret sauce, one of our secret sauce employers, what they're doing with the Pier 2 work for the Port of Astoria and what they across the board. And, you know, that's a real jewel and a real advantage for us with a company like that, headquartered in Clatsop County.
And I'll just glom onto that and maybe change its urgency, because when you think of them as temporary workers, when I'm talking to developers and construction managers in Portland, they're not finding subs in Portland. And so when they come to develop out here, it's even harder. And when we look to Kevin's point about the slate of projects, we're really looking already 6 and 8 years out if nothing comes on. And so kind of looking at, so I heartily agree. Thank you, Kevin. Or
well, and we've actually run into it we work for a lot of private development groups, and I can tell you anecdotally that a lot of times they hesitate doing work on the coast, including housing work, because they feel like they can't find the contractors locally. And they wish there was a better, in place contractor network, and it's expensive to bring them from out of town. And not beyond the point that the Portland metro area doesn't have any excess contractors right now. The contractors are very busy in Portland.
Well, and I'll just say, if you bring people in from out of town, there's actually no place for them to live. So it's kind of a vicious cycle.
Right.
Okay.
You know, I would say that again, like with the Maritime Museum, the $30 million expansion construction project was at an open house yesterday. Rickenbaugh Construction is the general contractor. Talking to Jared Rickenbaugh, who we all know here, has done phenomenal work, and just again, home based. The general contractor, normally that doesn't happen for a project that size, but again, how do we support companies like his?
That's great. Okay, so I'm hearing that probably construction trades should be added to the list of specific targets. I think that kind of ties into the question I had about education services, which is just kind of the name for the sector, but really what it gets into also is training and education for your workforce. And I know Jay mentioned in the chat about the need for perhaps more local training for construction specifically, but I wanted to maybe draw out some comments from the folks we have here and the industry experts on what kind of training, workforce training, they see as needed or desirable in the county. What might be missing, what they see, what kind of holes they see among job applicants that could perhaps benefit from some specific training. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I would say being part of the cabinet at the college, one of the hats, associate vice president of the college, overseeing our workforce training programs at the college and internship programs. So I would say that, we're going through some real changes at the community college. I think everybody's well aware of that. But we're looking, we have a solid foundation. We're the state's oldest community college, and we've had a lot of turnover, but we really have a committed staff, faculty, leadership board. And I know that we're really focused on our CTE side of the house, if you will. Again, talking about North Tongue Point and WCT and our welding program. We have a very robust welding program currently, but looking to build that. Working with the healthcare arena, CMH and Providence are two of our 3 largest employers in the entire county. They need more nurses. They need more MAs. They need more, that kind of training. The college, we as leadership focused on that. And also we have, they'll obviously stop here and think of on the college side. But we also have things that are in our business department. We things that we need to get on our technology side. But I would say that, the focus of the college is the CTE. We have our MERTS campus, our maritime campus. There's an $8 million grant that the state awarded to the college. And we're working with Colpack and other key partners to get a match for that in the next couple of years to not lose it. And so, laser focused, even with transition on those.
Thank you. Seeing other thoughts on that issue being volunteered at the moment. So are there thoughts on anything else on this list? And so we've had the ideas of things we might add or manufacturing and construction, had some comments on how we might edit or talk about some of these issues, but are there others that we need to add? And could anyone speak to the issue of the destination resort? My notes on that from the last meeting were, I guess, confusing. So could someone speak to the idea of if that's an attractive idea to the county, or if there's resistance to having destination resorts there?
So, Brendan, I don't remember it coming up at the last meeting, but there's probably a lot of things I don't remember these days. But I know that over the past maybe 10 years on and off, there have been inquiries about a destination resort, mainly out on the east side of the county, out by Clifton Bradwood area. And part of that was stemming from the Metolius legislation, where they were able to transfer their development credits over to another county. I know that legislation has expired now, and I believe there's some litigation involved in that. But I don't know what everybody thinks about it. But a destination resort, for those who aren't familiar with the term, it's different than a KOA or a big campground or something. I mean, you're talking hundreds of homes that are going to be primarily second homes or short-term rentals. It's a place where people come to vacation and stay, and it's, as I understand it, pretty self-contained. I mean, people are free to leave the compound, but I don't know how much economic growth or money that would bring into the community, because people are at that point pretty much staying within the destination resort. That's the whole point.
Isn't it similar to like Sun River, Gale?
Yeah, I was trying to think of the one. Yeah.
And
What
so
I
just
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Linda. Oh, I was going to say, I guess before I comment on that, I kind of want clarification on this target industries. So if it's on this list and the plan was adopted, would staff then be, kind of under direction to make that happen, or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good question. So where the target industries feed in is that there's added discussion about them in the report, added focus on them. And then as we come up with the forecast for the next 20 years, we want that to reflect that the county has said it is our goals and policies to support and increase employment in these sectors. And so in that case, the 20-year forecast might, in fact, probably will reflect, some additional stronger growth in these areas, because that's what the county is seeking to do. But what that feeds into after we crunch the numbers is the process of coming up with actual strategies and policies at the end of this project to do that. So that's where the targets come in. They really are kind of the goals of, or one of the goals of the project itself, and feeding into the action items and strategies that come out the other end.
Right. And so that would underscore my point, is that if that's the idea, and we know that we have limited resources here, we're always going to have limited resources in terms of buildable lands, in terms of housing, in terms of things like that. I don't know that I would put accommodation and food services, tourism specifically, or destination resort in particular on that list, because they're intensive in need for housing and infrastructure, and not intensive in the quality of the level of income that they come. They're going to be here. We want to support what we've got, but I don't know that we're looking at it as a growth. That we want to prioritize growth in those industries. I would think that we would spend the limited resources we have going after industries that are going to raise the standard of living.
Here, here. Thank you, David.
Okay.
Well, I would agree with that comment. I guess the only comment I would make, kind of a push, not a pushback, but I think about like my office is here in Seaside, and I think about Cannon Beach and Seaside, and what percentage of the business here in South County is accommodations and food. So I totally agree. The destination retail, Gail said it well. I get a tire kicker thing about once a year about Bradwood Landing or whatever. But I guess on the accommodation, for maybe David, you could maybe elaborate a little bit more. I'm thinking, hotels and what it means to our entire economy, obviously. But I'm thinking here in South County.
Yeah, without question, it's big, and having it be successful is important. I just think that if you were talking about taking the resources of the county and saying, we want more of this, let's get more of this, I think that grows organically. And the things that we tip the scales on, if you will, would be those that bring us more higher paying jobs that will replace some of the higher paying jobs that we may lose through habitat conservation, or that we just want that growth. So if you're talking about where we're going to spend our resources, where we're going to spend our attention, I'm not saying ignore those things, and I'm certainly not saying shrink them, but I would think that you would want that growth to be organic and happen on its own, and then spend your efforts on attracting things that are harder to bring.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, Brendan, I have one more item as well. In the other category where we talk about the food processing, fermentation, these seafood products, and I know we've got seasonal seafood processing already addressed somewhat in the comprehensive plan. But at our first meeting, there was a lot of discussion from those two industries about how infrastructure and especially water treatment is impacting their businesses and the work that they do. So I just want to make sure that we keep that in the back of our heads, because I don't see anybody here from those two sectors today. So I just wanted to bring that back up.
Okay, thanks. That might be a good transition into the next thing I was hoping to talk about. But I just wanted to quickly talk to David's point about one thing we can do in the report is talk about the tourism industry, retail and stuff, talk about it as an important industry, but not necessarily one that needs to be the focus of additional growth beyond organic growth. So we can definitely do that.
Agreed. Thank you. And I'm not dismissive of the quality of those jobs or the opportunities that they create. I believe that they are an excellent part of our economy. But if you're looking to grow, you want to grow in ways that are balanced, and we're already a little out balanced on that side.
Okay. So getting to Gail's point, the next sort of slide that I want to make sure that we've covered and that we as the consultant team have a fuller understanding about is some of the anticipated challenges and obstacles to economic development in the county. And again, we have some that have been listed in the comprehensive plan. We have others that came up last time. I don't know if I should read through all of them, but some of the challenges to the natural resources industries have been well known. The county's historical dependence on those industries rather than being fully diversified, low pay, and for the visitor and retail sectors, as we just commented on, fragmented local planning. That's something that I think we will get to hopefully in the next few minutes. Insufficient industrial land in rural areas. We will also be talking about the inventory in a few minutes. Development pressures on the resource lands and remaining employment lands, and the disproportionately high number of retirees in the community. Those were all things that have been listed in the plan. newer things that are coming out are the significant challenges from the FEMA implementation plan, changes to the flood insurance program, the Department of Forestry's Habitat Conservation Plan. Both of these are expected to severely impact the resources, the resource land available, and the future of those sectors in the county. Earthquake and tsunami natural disaster risks are limiting how and where coastal communities can build. Affordable housing and child care, we've talked about a lot. The housing side, child care, of course, is another very important aspect of that for your local workforce. Something that came up last time was the dependence on Highway 30 in particular. I think it may also apply to 101, but it has to do with the importance of those facilities, and if something happens on them, the ability to really kind of tie up movement throughout the county. And then we had the wastewater infrastructure and DEQ requirements. And I kind of touched on this on the last slide, but workforce skill and education issues. So again, there's a list of the things we have. There's a lot on this one, but I wanted to make sure to throw it open to say, is there anything we're missing? Are any of these things listed as challenges? Not so much challenges anymore. Are some of these obsolete? Or any just particular thoughts on any of these individual items. So I will throw it back to the group.
Well, I would ask, I maybe we go to opportunities, right? I think about like the forest and wood products industry, and I think about, we're all aware of the challenges, and, you know, many of them not of our making, but I'm thinking about opportunities, and maybe that's next one. I think about like Oregon State University, and about how they've been given, what it was, $50 million on cross-laminated timber, kind of like, you know, type of construction. And it seems like Portland's getting all of that. And, you know, how do we have a seat at the table? And I've talked to folks at Oregon State about that, for example. And again, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And on the DEQ, I would just say that DEQ requirements, that, you know, that 900J permit is going to be devastating if it goes through to our seafood processors.
Okay. Alyssa?
Is the issue of local government capacity to process permits. And I think we see that with, you know, all of the cities who have so much going on, just thinking about Astoria and CMH, let alone all the other things that they're doing, and how they've had to bring in outside help just to move things through a development process. And I could see that that could be a potential barrier to economic development as well.
Thank you. That's an important point. Are any reps from local government here who maybe comment on that further, or I don't want to put you on the spot? David?
Forgive me, not on that. I'm. If you have somebody that can comment on that, that's not me. But I was going to just kind of ask on this: how much of a signal does this finished document going to provide? In other words, if we're talking about the habitat conservation plan as though it's going to happen, and it probably will. We're talking about these permits for seafood. If we come out with a plan that says we want all these things that are not natural resources, and does that not support the idea that those types of decisions at the Salem level are okay? Like, well, they're not going that direction anyway. Do we need to be signaling? Do we need to be tilting at windmills in this as well as being practical? I guess. Do we need to say yes? We want more, you know, natural resources jobs. We want more seafood process. We want more, not less of this. Do we need to be saying that in this document, or is this simply a practical in-house conversation?
I think that's a great question. I think Jerry can add his thoughts too. I think the document should reflect, it needs to reflect the actual economic development goals. So assuming that the goals coming out of this are to keep those industries strong, then yes, I think it needs to reflect that that's the intention and the desire of the county, and not just sort of cede that ground to Salem or
Oh, yeah.
outside forces.
And I think all these things, if you lay out the rationale and the policy very clearly and the goals, it allows later follow-on work to say we're taking this action consistent with the adopted goals to support this industry. And so then things flow in a natural way. The state tends to be happier. And hopefully the elected leaders at the same time, you can tie decisions based on adopted policies, makes it cleaner.
Thank you. I had to mute myself. There's some sounds of the city coming in from outside here. Okay, so that's an important point. So we want to make sure that we're not ceding ground and that we are reflecting the actual economic development goals of the county and not just sort of surrendering.
If I could address the permitting real
great.
quick.
Yeah.
So yeah, we are kind of piecing things together as, at least in Astoria, with these upcoming projects. And it is, certainly going to be a challenge, but it, also provides the opportunity that we share services and kind of, take a long look at that, particularly the commercial plumbing inspector, which I think most cities are having an issue with. So maybe that's part of the discussion, sharing services among the county.
Great. That is, yeah, the kind of thing that makes for a good strategy or policy to add to that section of the report. Those types of ideas. That's great. Are there other thoughts on this slide from anybody? Existing challenges or others that need to be listed? We talked a little bit about last time, but I think that this particular EOA for Clatsop County is going to have a bit more focus on these challenges than other EOAs might, because it's an important part of understanding, I think, the ground, the facts on the ground out there. So some of these I'll keep moving along here to keep an eye on our time. It's only about 11 o'clock right now, so I think we're actually doing pretty well. So are there any other questions or comments on this? Jenny?
Yeah, I know I'm gonna sound like a broken clock, but I cannot stress enough how important housing is, like how dire the housing situation is in our county. And, I understand all these other pieces, but if we don't have basic housing that's affordable for our community, we cannot make anything else work. And it is extremely dire. We see that a lot with the people the community that we work with, people filling up a trailer, having sleeping schedules so that someone takes the morning shift and someone takes the afternoon shift. I just think that for most of us participating in this meeting, we have adequate housing and we're comfortable, and we don't really think about just how dire the situation is for the community.
Okay.
I just wanted to second that, especially if we're talking about growing jobs up and down the employment scale. We've had people come into the community, stay in a temporary housing situation, and then quit their job and leave because they couldn't find something permanent. So it really affects the whole spectrum. And then I wanted to call out Matt's comment in the chat about infrastructure overall being an issue. Wastewater is on here in particular, which is great, but pretty much all of our infrastructure is kind of antiquated and on the verge of being an urgent problem, I'll say.
Okay. Right.
Does that have another side, Sarah Lou? Is that, I mean, given the extent of the infrastructure work that needs to happen here, is capacity to build infrastructure, those industries, or is that a growth possibility for us for the next few decades?
I think it could be. I think it relates to trades, and I think it kind of relates, the other side of that capacity was Alyssa's point about, kind of on the permitting and QC side of things. I think all of those are intertwined. But to Jenny's point, everybody I know here works. So getting that housing in to be able to change the capacity. Yeah. No surprise to anybody here. It's all tied together.
Thank you. That is, yeah, I want to just emphasize again, housing is definitely going to be an important part of this discussion. And not,
Well, and again, I know Jay's alma mater, city of Warrington. It's like, that whole Fort Point development, for example, whatever the number is, 450 homes at all levels of incomes that's under development, like talking to Esther Moberg and Henry Balanciever, et cetera. The wastewater treatment plant in Warrington is almost ready to fail, or whatever. But the point is it is hand in hand, like Sarah Lou said.
Yeah.
And I'm all over here in the comments. I see that Jerry said something that I just wanted to give some feedback on regarding Highway 30 does not have a top priority rating with ODOT. I know that they are being lobbied by the Area Commission on Transportation, both out of Clatsop and Columbia counties. And if this document retains the mention of Highway 30, that would certainly be a bonus. And if we want to get specific, maybe instead of a parentheses about susceptible to accidents and emergencies, we could put the request in there, which is to, at least what I've heard and I understand and kind of support, would be to enhance existing like low grade roads. So there actually are alternative routes when Trip Check tells you to take one. So that would be the fix. We're not going to build another highway, but if there could be more alternate routes that are kind of brought up to drivable standards, that would be really helpful.
Well, I know also GP1 we talked about links to get information on Clatsop County, but again, as the one of the top 2 employers in the county, GP1 and Mill, they've been very vocal, and I know that Christy's not on this call, Christy Ward, but she was last time, and talking about, you think about like investment in that spot. If you don't have the access for the workers or suppliers, et cetera, you're going to really be in bad shape.
okay. Well, all this stuff is another good transition into what I wanted to move into, which is sort of more general discussion topics. And we've already had quite a bit of discussion, so we don't need to belabor it. But if we have lots more, that would be great. But some of these things would get into some of the solutions or actions that we might see coming out of this process. We're going to have another opportunity in our next meeting in a few months to talk about some more concrete ideas for strategies and actions. But I just wanted to see if this particular group has ideas from a higher level of what does this look like for the county to be undertaking this study right now? What is the role of the county working with the cities and vice versa to encourage economic development and to get to free up some of these issues of land availability, infrastructure, housing, not just employment lands. So I really would like to hear some thoughts on that. What levers does the county have for economic development? And since one technical outcome of this study is looking at the unincorporated areas specifically, what's needed from those lands, what might be done there. So I know this is sort of a broad range of topics. It could be fairly open-ended, but I'm wondering if that sparks comments or thoughts from anyone in this group.
Well, I know that as the Economic Development Organization for the county, CEDAR, like talking to Don Boone, for example, I know we have this study where obviously we're all involved with, but also then in kind of concurrently or down the road, if you will, in terms of on the actual economy, and the future, and actually getting input from the governor's office. And again, like I think it's very clear to say we're not caving on anything, but I think kind of going through that process. So the county is taking an active lead on that, which is fabulous. And I know that the cities and the county, we meet monthly together, the city managers, county managers, Monica, myself, others. And that, excuse me, we are having our office vacuum. I'll close my door. Be right back.
Okay.
We're low on staff at the college, and we take cleaning our building when we can. But so I would just say that I think that's been the county, Don, Monica, Gail, et cetera, have done a really good job. I just think that continue to do what this process is about and involving the cities. We're very collaborative here in Clatsop County.
Great. Yeah, that's good, and we can obviously see the collaboration and the amount of thought that's already gone into this. So,
and I don't want to.
And you've been working on this for years and years, I know. So
I don't want to bring up, and I mean, we keep talking about this, and I think it'd be very helpful. We also, what's our toolkit, and what can we do to incentivize? And we know that 95% of our growth in Clatsop County comes from within. And it's kind of like, David, myself, others are on the front line with the business community, and their comments about, well, we just really struggle working with City X because of Y. And I think Matt gave a great example of sharing resources. I think that'd be just very helpful. We talked about it for years. What can we do to, and Alyssa said it, I think the best about what can we do to knock down those barriers? What's needed? What can we do? I know that Business Oregon, for example, has talked about maybe some funding. Melanie Olson, we've spoken about this in the past. What, to help with a log jam or to help with whatever. So I would say that's just a big issue, and perception, reality. And you have folks saying, I'm not going to build in Astoria, or I'm not going to build in Clatsop County because of. And I think that would just be really helpful for us to kind of get that out, roll up our sleeves, get it out there, and show those making investments in the private sector that we have our challenges, but they're being worked on, or there is progress, or because of constraints that may not be aware of. I know it's always staffing, et cetera, that it's not going to get better. And that it's kind of like the housing thing that Jenny brought up. I mean, if we continue to have the challenges, it's going to be like just, kind of a continued challenge. So.
Okay, thank you. Monica?
I'm gonna let David go. He had his hand up longer.
David.
Oh, sorry, David.
No problem. I will say, so the buildable lands inventories can be part of it. Certainty is what is missing. It's less to do with cost, it's less to do with convenience. It has everything to do with certainty. We've had people approach us out here who have a project that's basically shovel ready. They're ready to go. But when we talk about the land, we've got to evaluate it through 17 different agencies, and it's going to take a year and permits, and we don't really even know if that land is usable for that thing. And that time between ready to go and we can put the shovel in the ground is our biggest impediment. So it has to do with housing. It has to do with just about everything else we're talking about here. So certainty, really, when I look at this, I say, hey, what can we do to get things out of the way before the project comes up? So that's what I would say.
Okay, great.
I'll just add, in a lot of instances, like already mentioned, the county and the cities, they collaborate really well together. And, the county is going to continue to facilitate a lot of projects. We, in some instances, have the capacity to kind of provide that facilitation aspect, kind of like what Gail's leading right now. We're working on various projects like to try to address some situations with our fermentation sector and our processing seafood processing sector through a biodigester, which is going to have a countywide impact for the other jurisdictions. But at the state level, the county is also actively trying to, David's point, address some of these land use issues in regards to the challenges that we have with wetlands and developing property out here. You know, if we're not confined by forests, then we are confined by the ocean, the river, and wetlands. And so the county's kind of trying to be that facilitator at the state level to get that work done. We're also looking at, you know, what are some of our options in regards to revenue replacement, because we are going to be heavily impacted by the HCP. And so that means some of the resources that we've been able to set aside to help with other jurisdictions aren't going to be as readily available for us. And so what other revenue replacement options might there be at the statewide level? So I think that collaboration down here, and the only other piece of it, and I'd let Gail speak to it, but in some instances in regards to our unincorporated lands and how might that change, I think that's going to be addressing the urban growth boundary issue. And a lot of the more rural areas are a challenge because we don't have the infrastructure out there. And if there is any small or minimal infrastructure, it is very outdated and doesn't have the capacity to take on more growth.
Great, thank you. A lot there. Sarah.
Yeah, kind of a question on the what levers does the county have for economic development? Is there a list you're starting from, or do you want us to tell you now? Because I know Kevin's got some, we've got some, we need some, county has some. What are you looking for?
Well, that's great. I think that's maybe the answer I'm looking for. So one thing could just, for to have folks tell me, Kevin and yourself and others, hey, we have our list, we have our sort of toolkit put together, and then I can follow up with you to get that. That's the definite starting point. I don't think we need to go through all of them now, but I think I kind of wanted to address it on a higher level of saying what does the county have in this process? It has some employment lands of its own, has the potential maybe to create new employment lands. It has an opportunity to change its zoning and entitlements for what can be done with those lands and those kind of things. But yeah, so yes, anyone who has those ideas or some sort of toolkit put together, please let me know. Please let us know, and we'll follow up on to get that. And that'll form the foundation.
Okay, if you want to have a conversation offline, I know that we would be happy to do that.
And I would too, Brendan. I would just say that one thing that we've had a lack of for many years, we finally have it now, is we have a brand new website, Cedar does. Because in the past, somebody would say about, what do I do to open a business or whatever? And it's gone to the county, or then they call me, or they go to the whatever. But so clatsetbusiness.com is our new website that covers all of our partners that are on this call, or many of them. So I would just say, we can talk further, but that gives more kind of detail about also being the enterprise zone manager for the county, et cetera. And hopefully kind of a one-stop in as folks are shopping around here on the internet.
Great. Were there any representatives from the specific industries here who had additional thoughts on going through this process, what it is the county and its partners might do to address your most pressing industry needs? I know this has been part of the conversation all along, and we've touched on many of these things, but if there's anything else, please let me know. Not seeing additional
Let's get
hands.
to BLI while we have Mackenzie here too.
I was just gonna say, I think we work really closely right now with the county with the immediate threat of the habitat conservation plan and everything else that's been discussed in this meeting. So far, we've covered our bases and what we're doing to work together moving forward. So if anything pops up, I'll definitely pop in the chat or pop on and speak up. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so with that, we would like to move on to the issue of the buildable lands inventory. So that's another part of looking at the supply of employment lands, and Sid will walk us through the methodology and so on. I do want to point out that one little surprise is we do have a revision already from what we sent out earlier this week in terms of the bottom line numbers. So we will be getting to that. And then obviously we'll be, after this conversation, sending out a revised version. The other thing I want to say to set it up is that this is always the beginning preliminary draft of the buildable lands inventory. There are always things that we get wrong from the 30,000 foot level, specific sites that have problems that we haven't found and so on. So please just be patient and understand that this is their first draft, and the point of this is to really get your comments and to get your expertise from on the ground of what we have and haven't understood about some of these sites and areas. So thank you. With that, I will turn it over to Sid to talk about how they went through this process. Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. My name's Sid Harharangat. I don't know if everyone here was here at the beginning of the meeting. I was not here at the last meeting, so I just want to introduce myself. I'm a land use planner with Mackenzie, and we're working on the BLI component of the EOA. So first, I just want to give an overview of what a BLI is. A buildable lands inventory, it's to further the county's economic development objectives while also identifying parcels that are available and suitable for commercial and industrial development. So the scope of this study is to focus on employment land within the county. So when I say within the county, I know Gail made a clarification of this earlier. I'm looking at the area of unincorporated Clatsop County that's outside the cities and outside their respective urban growth boundaries. So in this kind of short presentation, I think probably 10, 15 minutes here, I just want to give an overview of the methodology we use to set up how we do our buildable lands analysis and create the inventory. And really what it comes down to, it's a set of a system of filters. So we kind of start quite wide and just kind of keeps filtering down and down. So with that context in mind, if we go to the next slide, the first step, let me actually say that if you have any questions throughout this, please interrupt me as I'm speaking. I'd love to address them as we go. So the first step here was to categorize the land that's zoned or planned for employment. And so we did this through a GIS computer-based analysis with county data to identify the areas of unincorporated Clatsop County that are zoned both industrial and commercial. And I'll show some map excerpts here throughout the presentation. On the right here, we have kind of a countywide, and I know some of the maps you got, the scale is quite large because we're trying to encompass the whole county. So we'll work on refining how we're representing these different nodes of employment land throughout the county. So after the first step, we kind of found these areas. And the second step, if we go next slide, was the methodology to determine which properties are considered vacant or redevelopable. I'm going to go through these definitions real quick. So vacant are parcels with Clatsop County assessor improvement value of 0 and no visually identifiable development. And that was based on aerial photography. And the other category of land that we looked at was redevelopable. And it was split into two categories. That's the industrial and the commercial. For the industrial redevelopable, it's parcels over 2 acres with building values less than 30% of the total land value, and parcels over 5 acres where less than 1/2 acre is occupied by permanent buildings or improvements. And the industrial and commercial definitions for redevelopable are quite similar, with the exception of the underlying language there that says for industrial, we looked at parcels over 2 acres. And for commercials, it's parcels over 1 acre. And that's really to do with industrial development generally needs a larger footprint, and commercial development comes in a wide variety of sizes. And that's what those acreage differences account for. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to show a graphic here. So this is an excerpt from figure 3.1 of, we found through our data analysis that along Highway 26 here, there's a number of commercial vacant sites and also some industrial vacant down at that southeastern corner of the map. I guess my mouse probably isn't showing up on there, but the next step we did after we kind of figure out, okay, what is vacant, what is redevelopable throughout the entire county, was to see, okay, they say they're fully vacant, but what difficulties would you have in developing this land? So what constraints are present on these sites? If we go next slide. So the constraints that we looked at were property within the 1% annual chance floodplain, so the 100-year floodplain. Wetland areas, I know it's been discussed throughout this group discussion. There's a large amount of wetlands within the county. Areas identified as the medium tsunami inundation scenario, as well as slopes. And for slopes, we broke it down into 2 categories, and that's the industrial and commercial. So for industrial land, we said 5% or greater was considered a development constraint. And that's really because industrial development looks for a flatter site, whereas commercial can kind of accommodate a little more slope on site. So that's why it's a 10% threshold for commercial employment land. And then we mapped these constraints throughout the county. And so this is an excerpt of figure 4.1, which I think you've received copies of those figures. This is that same area I showed earlier. And as you can see, there's kind of these yellow bands throughout many of these sites, yellow, orange, tan, kind of in that color range. And those identify areas that are constrained. So those constraints could be slope, they could be wetlands. Here, there's really no floodplain or tsunami just in this part of the county, especially for these sites in particular, but there is quite a bit of slope along Highway 26 through this corridor. So that's what you can see. Those bands there are, for the commercial lands, it's slopes greater than 10%. And the next step we took is, okay, we have these vacant sites, and then we have these redevelopable sites, but we also have these constraints. So we need to quantify how much of these sites that are defined as vacant and redevelopable are actually constrained and therefore not buildable. And that's what the figure 5.1 here, this excerpt shows, is the areas in yellow throughout these sites are considered not buildable. So those are takeoffs essentially from the tax lot acreage of those individual sites. And through this filtering process, we, and that's a countywide filtering process for that unincorporated Clatsop County outside cities and UGPs, we came to a table, if we go next slide, that there's approximately 201 developable acres within the county. And if we go to the next slide, we have some preliminary takeaways from kind of our first rendition of this analysis. And so I said there's 201 net buildable acres. It's split actually almost even between commercial and industrial zones, although commercial zones have roughly 2/3 of the site. And this just happens to be with commercial zones are typically commercial tax lots, and sites are definitely smaller and often than those industrial sites. As well as one thing we did notice through our analysis is that there's extensive slope constraints throughout the site, especially because so many of these highways and major corridors are located in valley areas. So that was one challenge that appeared on a lot of these sites. And with that, I'd welcome any questions, any questions you have on particular sites, regions of the county, the methodology of our analysis. I welcome any feedback.
So I'm just gonna mention again the infrastructure, specifically the area that you just brought up, Elsie Vine Maple. There's a portion of that area that is like a private water system. And so, like, for example, the last year and a half, they've been on a boil water notice, and for the last couple weeks, they've gone off and on without having any water. So when trying to develop, economic opportunities, those are going to be significant constraints that contribute to being able to develop those areas.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. And kind of in response to that is what we do as far as the next steps is we consider kind of once this is refined a bit more, we look at these sites in relation to available utilities. And really that's in the context of the target industries. So what do those target industries require as far as utility supply? And could that be accommodated in certain parts of that within the county? So we will consider those. I think Gail has a question. I see a hand up.
I do. So on the materials that we sent out for today's meeting, there was a calculation table in there that had the unincorporated county total of net buildable area as just over 638 acres.
Yeah.
So can you explain what the difference is between that material and what we're seeing today?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Gail. So between the time we sent out that material and yesterday, we did kind of a further refinement of the numbers and the sites that we'd looked at. And we'd found some areas that were kind of split zoned tax lots that they might have a different zoning in the middle of the tax lot, but our analysis was considering that area as buildable and not constrained. So we had to refine some of the numbers according to that, as well as update some of the constraints. And that's what really, the constraints are really what drew away a lot of that buildable acreage, because in the numbers that you got earlier this week, I think there was a marine industrial vacant site that was 90 acres or so up on the Columbia River. But once you apply the constraints to that site, it drops to about 6 acres. So there were some major takeoffs that happened. And I can maybe I can steal the screen real quick, Brendan, and just share kind of what this looks like graphically, because I know the maps are quite granular and we'll work to refine those, but just to give an idea to the group here of what the constraints do look like. Let me see if I can. Okay, can you let me know when you see a map on the screen?
Not yet. There we go.
Okay. So this is a site that in that earlier package we sent out showed was about a 90-acre site. And I'll zoom out for some context here. So there's Highway 30 running here, and this is just from that Clifton area. And so here when you go and you apply, this is kind of what it showed on that preliminary map. And when we reapply the constraints, the area in yellow here is actually constrained land. So some of these sites are, although they might say they're 8 acres, it might be a non-contiguous 8 acres where there might be 2 or 3 pockets that are not constrained. So the actual buildable area gets decreased and decreased even more as we refine the models that we're working through.
All right, thanks. So that helped a lot.
Sure.
And then in terms of how much acreage we should be aiming for, are we on the low side, the high side? Are we about where we need to be right now? I know that's probably the answer we get in the final document, but is there some rule of thumb that the county could use to measure where we fall on the scale?
So yeah, as you alluded to, part of the process that's coming is to come up with the employment growth forecasts to compare to this remaining amount of land. My preliminary look at that indicates that just numbers based, that is probably a sufficient amount of acreage that you have left for the sort of share of overall county growth that happens in the unincorporated areas. I think the bigger question for this group, and we don't have an answer yet, is what, I mean, we're going to be able to really identify all these remaining sites. And I think because of infrastructure and things and utilities, we're going to be able to start eliminating many of them. So I think the bigger question is not just, you know, is the bulk acreage sufficient, but it's like, does the county have the types of sites that it wants in unincorporated areas to accomplish what it wants to accomplish? So for instance, along the river here, I think at least zoning wise, it looks like the goal is to have some, you know, river-based maritime type industry happening here. Is it, are these sites sufficient to allow that to happen? Does the county need more sites? Does it need more employment lands? That's the bigger question, I think, in terms of policy and not just the bulk amount of acreage that's available.
I was also wondering, you know, this is unincorporated, obviously, but as we have people, you know, from the cities here, Seaside, you know, et cetera, and at the table, do we already have from the cities, like, I'm thinking, obviously, you know, City of Warrington and North Coast Business Park, and then we have the Port of Astoria, we have the airport. I mean, is there something that we could, like, maybe side by side, or I know this is a county funded study, but I just think that the big picture, is that something that we could also integrate?
I think that's the right question, is how does this fit in with the total picture for the county? We do have fairly recent EOA studies from Astoria and Warrenton that I know of. I think the other incorporated cities have studies that are probably fairly obsolete, but we can definitely look at that, you know, and try to draw from those sources as recent as they are, to put that comparison out there, because that's, you know, as we look at the profile of industries in the entire county, we know most of that employment is taking place inside the incorporated areas.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Forgive my ignorance here, but when we say 201 net buildable, what's an average? I mean, how many projects could this be? How many builds could this be? You know, I think Jay said that it doesn't mean that there's enough space on that land for building just because there's an acre of buildable land. But how long does this last, I guess, is a better question.
Yeah, I see Jay's comments in the comments. And that's exactly right. So it's the nature, it's not just the total acreage, it's the nature of these sites, where they're located and how large each of them are. In the next phase, McKinsey has done a lot of excellent work on the site characteristics and requirements for different types of industries. And so generally what jurisdiction wants to do is have a nice selection of sites for both commercial and industrial users of different sizes. You know, obviously some industries need 20 acres or 50 acres, and if those sites aren't available, then they can't locate in the county. So yeah, that's the next kind of phase of the consideration, is coming up with an assessment of the site needs for the jobs we're projecting, and then comparing that to the actual individual sites.
Yeah, and to follow up on Jay's comment there as well, you're talking about the total acreage, and I think it's also important to think about individual sites that may have constraints in certain parts of the sites. And say there might be a site that looks like 5 acres on paper, but when you go to look at it, you realize there's a wetland that runs right through the middle of it or restricts access to the site. So that's another consideration that we'll have through this refinement process, looking at those specific site challenges on an individual site-by-site basis.
So thank you. Watching the time here. So that's kind of an overview of the buildable lands process and the methodology used. And the next step is going to be to get you a revised version. I'm sorry that the table that we included earlier this week is not accurate, so don't rely on that one anymore. But we will get you a new package of materials that's updated, and also we need to get you access in a form where the experts, not necessarily everyone in this group, but staff and so on, can start looking at each of these sites individually and letting us know the types of challenges they face, as Monica brought up. So that will be the next step coming out of this meeting. Were there more, before I move on, are there more comments on the buildable lands inventory in particular and how that works? Not seeing any. So let's see. I'm going to reshare my screen, but oh, there it is. Okay. So moving on to next steps. We are planning to schedule a public work session with county officials to talk about the project thus far and get into the list of economic objectives, which will be included in the report. That is generally a list of the economic goals that apply to this project specifically, but it often provides a good list that can then be translated into a new set of goals for the comprehensive plan. We are going to get into doing the draft jobs forecast, hopefully reflecting what we've talked about today in terms of target industries and challenges. So then we'll have an idea of what the future growth is going to look like and what we need to plan for. We will refine the buildable land inventory and get the new version out to you. And then we will start drafting the economic development strategies, which will be kind of a menu form for discussion. So that will just be the first draft to give us something to talk about, but really we need those strategies and policies to come from you guys and have your input. So those are kind of the next steps. The next tag meeting, I think right now, was scheduled for April. We will see how that works with the calendar. That might shift a little bit, but we'll try to let everyone know as far enough in advance as we can. Those are the planned next steps for the projects. Are there remaining questions or comments about the project or anything we've talked about today, or anything that you would like to ask of us as the consulting team about how things are going at this point? Chat here. All right. Well, thanks everybody for your time today. Really appreciate it and all the good discussion. If you think of anything else, any other comments or materials, or anything or questions that you think we need as a consulting team, please communicate with Gail and she'll pass those on to us. And I'll follow up with a few people who mentioned specific things we might use on toolkits and so on. But that's all I have today. Thanks again. Really appreciate your participation.
Okay, thanks, Brendan. And thank you again, everybody. And I'll send out an email with a doodle poll to get some dates. All right. Bye.